Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Javed Metz with Contrast Security, and I'll be your moderator today. Thanks for attending the webinar today, A Journey of Chutes and Ladders, a real world of ups and downs of migrating to the cloud and securing applications. A recorded version of this presentation is available shortly following the conclusion, so feel free to share it with your colleagues. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. First, we have Rory McKinty, Director of Application Security at SAP Concur. We also have Scott Ward, Principal Solutions Architect at Amazon Web Services, AWS. And finally, we have Jeff Williams, Co-founder and CTO of Contrast Security. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jeff.
So I'm going to jump right into it. We have a serious application vulnerability problem. The average application today is millions of lines of code. About 21% of that is custom code, and 79% is libraries and frameworks, open source code, and so on. If you eliminate the unused libraries, it's more like 75% custom code and 25% libraries. But what's really critical is that the average application has 26.7 custom code vulnerabilities and several library vulnerabilities. Even one or two serious vulnerabilities would be a problem, but 26.7 is really amazing. Imagine if you were flying on an airplane and every time they audited an airplane, they discovered 26.7 safety problems. Because nobody would fly. But we've got a real problem with applications. So the vulnerabilities are really serious, but attacks are also happening all the time. And together, those form a really dangerous combination. The most prevalent attacks are on things like cross-site scripting and SQL injection and path traversal, but there's a huge long tail of kinds of attacks that are often really serious, including the attack that caused the Equifax breach in a library. Interestingly, the number of applications that are not attacked every month is zero. We monitor tens of thousands of applications for attacks. We've got tons of data, but every single application gets attacked every month. So it's not really surprising why AppSec has been the leading cause of breaches by a pretty wide margin for the last 10 years. Ultimately, it's really the economics of application security that's causing the problem. If you look at what application security programs are able to achieve in terms of securing code, it's getting overrun by folks' ability to produce more code faster. And it's just limitations in the number of people and the way the tools work and so on that causes this disparity. So until we focus on the economics and figure out a way to change the economics of application security, we're never going to be where we need to be. So the rapid delivery of software with DevOps is, in some ways, it's exacerbating this problem because it allows us to produce code faster. But DevOps is also going to save us. So there's a lot of people out there that'll try to tell you what DevSecOps is and it's all about. I want you to be aware of articles that describe sort of shoving legacy tools into the development process and putting sort of DevOps lipstick on them. Really, DevSecOps is about reinventing the work of security. Just in the way that DevOps was about reinventing the work of software development, we need to break down the work of security into small pieces, create instant feedback so that the people writing the code can make these fixes instantly and check in clean code, and ultimately create a culture that is focused on security innovation and learning, and not a culture of kind of reacting to the next vulnerability that comes down the pike. So that's my introduction. I'm thrilled to introduce our guests to talk about their experiences during this transformation.
So I'm going to take you folks on a brief journey on scaling application security using a decentralized testing platform in AWS and how we paired it with Contrast interactive testing. My name is Rory McEntee. I have the honor of leading the product security team at Concur, at SAP Concur. So I've been at SAP Concur for about 5.5 years now. A little about us. SAP Concur is a leader in enterprise travel, expense, and invoice management. Our B2B platform is used by over 50,000 customers, which translates to over 50 million users worldwide. We pride ourselves on an inclusive workplace environment, and we've got a strong work-life balance. So we're a pretty cool place to work at. So Concur's application security team started out basically like 6 years ago with only a few headcount and just a handful of centrally offered services. Static and dynamic analysis, running annual third-party assessments, cutting tickets, finding out who owns what, documenting everything we could. Honestly, it's amazing how far we've come. 4.5 years ago, we were acquired by SAP, which has been a blessing for Concur. They've given us resources and better tooling, which has allowed us to scale our services and provide our customers with a fantastic AppSec experience. Now, we have tooling integrated with our continuous delivery pipeline and security fully integrated with Concur's SDLC. However, 3 years ago, Concur started stepping out of our private data centers and started creating microservices in AWS. And Concur's security teams has been operating in two directions: securing our legacy monoliths, plural, and while keeping up with our microservices producing DevOps teams. So our executive leadership has invested quite a bit into our program. That said, our budget is still precious, and we need to make sure we're making the best tooling decisions for SAP Concur. So the traditional dynamic scanning, also known as DAST, tooling of yesteryear does not easily support web services, and we run into resource limitations while scanning large applications. They produce nice scan reports, though, but I'm not interested in checkbox compliance. That's not the kind of program we run. I want the best tools, preferably at the best prices, that are good enough so that even that 140 development teams are willing to adopt said tools, which means we need to have few false positives. Our developer time is valuable, and we've got a bonded trust with our R&D teams that has been forged partly just by not wasting their time. Although SAP Concur has adopted Contrast interactive testing, we still do static and dynamic testing. We run static analysis on pull requests with tailored rules to our code base. And we run a managed DAS program on all of our customer-facing web applications. If you point a DAS tool at concurrsolutions.com, which is our flagship app, you're not going to find anything interesting. We've been scanning the site with a DAS solution for 10 years. Before there even was an application security team, it used to be run by our compliance team. Now, that's not necessarily a challenge, although we do encourage folks to participate in Concur's responsible disclosure program. We have the clean reports. It makes audits and better management easy. But again, I'm not interested in that rubber stamp compliance. If there's a security issue that got past us, I want to know about it. If there's better tooling out there, we're going to look at it. So today, Concur development teams use ephemeral, decentralized testing environments hosted in AWS. We call the platform Faraday Cloud. Each developer gets their own environment, and they are torn down and rebuilt several times a month in AWS on demand. Our AppSec team uses them too for testing. It's light years past our old centralized QA environment developer VMs. It's great for development teams because they're always able to test the latest and greatest in a high availability platform without worrying that if their tests are going to affect other users. So it occurred to us that if we were able to deploy IS agents to these environments that would, of course, report back to a central console, we'd be able to get code coverage on scale that we'd never had before. So the tool that we chose would need to be able to support the main languages our monolith is written, support a licensing model that would work with a large amount of ephemeral environments, and we'd need to be able to provision the agents automatically to the environments. And then, of course, preferably the tool would be self-service and developer-friendly, which is not always the case with security tools. So we looked on other tooling on the market about 18 months ago and determined Contrast to be the most mature player on the market. The platform meets all of our requirements, and I'll say the customer service has been pretty good too. Contrast IS is an agent-based platform. The agents observe the application as it executes, which has our developers assist in testing whether they know it or not. The agents are hosted in our Artifactory. A short script installs the agent when an environment gets spun up. And that agent will automatically start reporting to our central contrast agent, our central contrast console, which is also hosted in AWS. Our AppSec team gets Slack notifications whenever a vulnerability of a certain severity is found. And we automate ticket generation for it, which we review during the day or at least during our daily stand-up. The Slack and Jira integrations are native to the platform, and the tool is plug and play, easy to upgrade, and I'm really proud of the success story we've built with it. Every engineer that has sat through a sales pitch on security tooling has heard the sooner developers are able to detect a security vulnerability, the cheaper it is to fix it. And it's true. It's the whole shifting left philosophy. I think at minimum, security tooling needs to be built into all pull requests of production services, and that is not a trivial ask. There's going to be some engineering involved, and a security team needs a high level of confidence in the tooling to deliver true positives, or you're going to cause friction in the organization. At Concur, we use the native integrations wherever possible, but we will write our own when we have specialized requirements. Now, it's incredibly difficult to have traditional DAS tooling in a CI/CD build because it can take days, or if it's a web service, it's a black or gray box approach. In any case, it's hard to scale and get meaningful coverage and results. So we've got a few different ways we use Contrast at Concur. So access to Contrast IS is self-service. Users are automatically provisioned via our identity provider when they sign in for the first time. Manually managing users is not a great use of my team's time. We've learned that the hard way. For each of the services that teams explicitly own, each of the services, we can make them evaluate their own scan findings and remediate in a decentralized way with the occasional trust but verify audit from application security. However, Concur has several big monoliths where every piece of the app isn't always mapped out neatly to a specific team. So for the monolith scans, Concur's application security team will review the findings centrally and issue tickets to teams directly. The former decentralized approach is obviously preferable, but for us to ensure timely remediation of issues, a hybrid responsibility model has worked best for us. So I'm not going to tell you that Contrast IS will solve all of your application security tooling needs, but it sure covers a lot when you include the code coverage and the true positive rate and the native integrations for reporting and bug trackers, as well as for your CI/CD services. And then there's also the open source component scanning. And then there's also that awesome customer service that I mentioned earlier. These things are all very important to me. So if I had the choice of only one tool in my program, it would be Contrast IS. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Scott with AWS.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, Rory. Awesome information to hear. This is Scott Ward from AWS, and Concur is an AWS customer, and Contrast is an AWS partner. Let's talk about why AWS and how that's enabling these partners and customers to be successful when it comes to running on the platform, and why security is such a key factor there. When it comes to AWS, security is our top priority, and so we listen very closely to our customers. We want to be able to offer them a secure cloud computing environment, and we want to give them innovative security services that are going to satisfy their security and compliance needs, and focus on meeting the needs of even the most risk-sensitive organizations. So today, AWS protects, we have millions of active customers around the world, and those customers represent some pretty diverse industries with a wide range of use cases, including large enterprises, startups, educational institutions, and even government organizations. And the scale and the global reach of these customers really gives us a pretty unique visibility, a very broad visibility, and some deep perspective on their cloud security needs, which is knowledge that we then take and we actually rapidly reinvest that back into our platform and our infrastructure and services. So when we talk about security, AWS really starts with the core infrastructure. What we have there is custom built for the cloud, and it's designed to meet even the most stringent security requirements in the world. It's monitored 24/7 to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our customers' data. And then we take those same skill sets and we actually use that to actually build and maintain our broad selection of security services, so that help customers kind of simplify meeting their own security and regulatory requirements. And so as an AWS customer, regardless of your size or your investment in AWS, you inherit all of the benefits of our experience, as well as you get, that you're tested against the strictest third-party assurance frameworks that are out there. So a lot of benefits you get when it comes to security. We also have we have the largest network of security partners and solutions, and that enables our customers to really extend the benefits of AWS by using the security technology and consulting partners from some very familiar solution providers and some born in the cloud solution providers that help them ultimately achieve security goals that they need to when they're running on AWS. So if we go to the next slide, we've talked a lot about DevSecOps in this presentation already, and it's really important to think about AWS because of the scale that you can actually achieve and how it allows you to go fast and deeply and innovate more frequently. So why DevOps? Why DevSecOps in the first place? There's a lot of competing forces that all want to have their say in how things are done, and when it comes to the overall business, and want to ensure that their needs are met. So when we look at the kind of the business as a whole, they want to be able to innovate. They want to be able to react to the needs of their customers quickly, or be able to move and change when market or competitive landscape changes. This is going to put a lot of emphasis on the development teams for being able to actually build things faster to be able to meet the needs that the business wants, which is then going to put the onus on the operations team to actually keep things stable and really be able to handle that change quickly. And then there's a security team who needs to be able to make sure things are secure and protect the valuable data and the assets of the company. For all of this to really work, these are things that do not lend themselves well to manual processes and generally don't function well at human scale. And still allow you to be successful in your other goals. And so this really led to kind of the DevOps revolution, where there's a lot more automation around the build, test, distribute, and monitor phases. And this got a lot of things automated to meet most of the needs, but the security team still had their pieces that needed to be addressed. And if they stuck with the way they normally did things, once again, that human scale would not allow this to be very successful. So security has found ways to insert themselves into this overall process, leading to the DevSecOps terminology. They're really along for the ride. The security teams are taking on their own engineering resources. They have their own sprints. They are inserting themselves into the DevOps pipeline, either with third-party tools such as Contrast or their own custom processes, allowing them to participate in that overall pipeline and really give the feedback that's needed to the operations and the developers team and to the security teams, so they get that quickly and as early as possible, so they can really react to those and remediate things quickly. So when it comes to AWS, we feel that this entire process is really enabled through the broad portfolio of services that we offer to customers, the rich set of APIs that are there to actually be able to allow you to interact with the AWS services, and then once again, that broad security partner ecosystem that customers can choose from to really help them meet their security needs overall. If we take a look at the next slide, kind of building on the last slide, let's just take a look at some of the phases you might find when it comes to code integration and code deployment in a pipeline, and where you might have security checks throughout that pipeline. First, you're going to have that pre-commit phase where the code is really being written and not really part of your code repository yet, but there's some opportunities to really actually understand that. In this phase, you're going to be looking to give feedback on what the developer is doing to really help influence the right decision and make sure that the right coding practices are enforced right away. This could start with threat modeling, where even before a line of code is actually written, you're asking questions around the architecture, identifying how security-related items are actually going to be addressed before a line of code is ever written. You're going to code reviews by peers, and then even you're going to be finding and getting that real-time feedback from tools like Contrast that might actually be in the development environment the developers actually using, helping them to establish the right practices early on. You get into the commit phase, you're going to be starting to look at the code in a larger sense of how it actually works. Things like making sure the code compiles in the overall build, maybe even some deeper static code analysis, although once again, that really depends on what value you think you're going to get out of that. This might be also where if you're doing containers, you might start pulling that container image and actually scanning it and making sure it lines up with your security standards. Then there might be some basic unit tests with that piece of code that go along with those particular checks. The acceptance phase, where you're kind of bringing everything together, you're going to be starting to look at, how is all this secure in the context of the broader application or service that's actually being deployed. So we might start focusing on the configuration of that overall infrastructure that actually powers that workload, making sure that it lines up with security standards, and it maybe even leveraging to infrastructure templates that have been approved by the security team or even defined by that security team. Some more unit testing to make sure that overall app is actually functioning, and starting to do some pen testing, vulnerability scanning as well. And then finally, the deploy phase, where you actually are out there and running it in production and allowing people to use it, where you're really going to start looking into the configuration of the workload, make sure that's correct and compliant, and then really using those tools like Contrast to actually be able to know and get that real-time feedback about how is this application actually being used out in the wild, and ensure that those risks or exploits that maybe happening at runtime are really identified and blocked, and the right information is coming back to the teams as quickly as possible. So if we go on to the next slide, when it comes to security in AWS, it really is important to be able to understand where the responsibility comes when it comes to security in AWS. There's no one party that has full responsibility when it comes to security in AWS. The customer has some responsibility, and AWS has some. And on the AWS side, we have responsibility for the global infrastructure, so the locations around the world where we actually house the infrastructure that powers AWS, and then we're also responsible for the software that powers the core platform, things around compute, storage, database, and networking. And we back all that up with our third-party compliance reports. So there's a few of them listed here on this slide, but we work with our third-party auditors to actually validate and test the controls that we've built to maintain compliance with these organizations. And then those reports are produced as third-party attestations to our customers, so they can see how AWS is lining up and meeting these compliance requirements. So with all that said, then customers really just are focused on their security configurations in the cloud. So they're going to be thinking about what they're going to be doing with their actual data moving around in their network. They're going to define how their network is configured and what kind of protection they need in place, defining if they're going to use encryption in transit, determining if they're going to be using encryption of their data at rest, and if they're going to use client-side or server-side encryption. Customers own and control the operating systems of the virtual machines they run, which means they get a lot of flexibility what they install and the software they use, but also means that they're responsible for all the patching that goes along with that operating system, as well as turning on any like local network or firewall configuration that might exist at the OS level. And then really kind of building even more on the concur and contrast story. Customers are responsible for the platform and the applications that they actually deploy on top of AWS. When it comes to security, they're responsible for making sure that the things that they're deploying out there are secure, and that they're putting the proper monitoring and remediation in place to deal with those platforms and the applications. And then customers are responsible for their data. Customers own their data when they store that on AWS, and they get a lot of flexibility about where they want to store their data on AWS, but they're responsible for making sure that they're determining that the right permissions are in place as far as who can access their data, and monitoring who is accessing their data, and also determining how they're going to protect their data when it comes to encryption, and determining how they want to encrypt their data and which portions of their data that they want to encrypt. So overall, this customer side is, allows the customers to take their security professionals and really refocus them from that bottom part that they might have been doing in their data centers, and focus on the top part, which is really the applications and the workloads that they're deploying and the things that are adding value to the customer. And this is also where the partners contribute the most value to the AWS customers. We have a lot of technology and consulting partners that are helping our customers with this shared responsibility for security in the cloud, and Contrast is certainly one of those partners, helping them secure applications and really enable more of a seamless DevOps workflow, and enable them to build new applications or migrate applications into the cloud with a secure focus right from the beginning. So moving on, as we wrap things up, I think that the biggest takeaway I would share here is that leveraging the cloud and the AWS security partners really enables our customers to be able to move fast and stay secure. We don't have to make a decision on which thing we're going to choose. We can do both. It really enables our security to keep up with what customers, with customers, and allows them to take advantage of the value props that the cloud really offers around self-service, elasticity, a wide variety of services available on the platform, and the ability to actually deploy at a global scope in a matter of minutes. This all ensures that the security can actually keep up with the business and enables that business to focus on what's really differentiating them, and allows them to innovate at a faster pace and continuously deliver more value to their end customers. Awesome. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Jweed, to kind of help us with a wrap up and next steps.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Really appreciate that. So to recap, right, as you've heard, companies like SAP Concur are taking advantage of this digital transformation that we're seeing in the marketplace and trying to bring the business value and economies that moving to the AWS cloud can bring in terms of cost efficiencies and economies, scale, flexibility, and speed, right? So if you're migrating to the cloud or migrating legacy apps or new apps to the cloud, you've heard about some of the key elements and best practices that you need to incorporate. As Rory had mentioned, the chutes and ladders, the pros and cons and best practices and lessons learned. Making sure that you've got the right tools, or making sure that if there are obstacles in the way with the current tools that you've got, the static and dynamic tools, making sure that you've got a solution and the technology that's there, whether it's through an IaaS tool, or also making sure you've got the right infrastructure through the AWS cloud. It's imperative that you have these right tools in order to be successful, right? Also, making sure that you stay ahead of the curve by making sure that security problems and issues are brought to the forefront, making sure that security is brought into the equation and into the conversation with key stakeholders earlier on into the process, right? As you make that transition and migration, it's really imperative to think about security much earlier on. And as you break down the work of security into the small discrete pieces, making sure that you create this culture of security innovation, making sure that you're available, that you can make it scale as companies move towards a more agile DevOps and DevSecOps process. And we've seen that some of the key business groups and outcomes that we need to be aware of in terms of business imperatives, making sure that you're able to be competitive by having the right tools. For the development teams, being able to build faster, operations teams, making sure that you can keep it stable, and with security teams, making sure that you can make it secure and bringing it much earlier on into the process allows you to move fast and stay secure. So in terms of next steps, if you want to find out more about Concur, AWS, and Contrast, we've got some URLs that you can find out more information on Concur and the products and services that they have. On the Amazon Web Services, they have a security page. With Contrast, we have our Community Edition, which is a free version that you can use and test out your apps. And we also have a marketplace site on Amazon Web Services. So also we have some Q&A. Let me just look here what we have from the audience. First question, I guess, Jeff, this is probably for you. How can I try Contrast on my application?
Oh, yeah, great question. So you just mentioned Contrast Community Edition. That's a great place to start. It's completely full strength and free for anyone to try. And all you have to do is go and just create an account, download the appropriate Contrast agents, and add it to your application, and then just do your normal development process. Contrast will do the security testing in the background and report you vulnerabilities. Contrast CE also includes library analysis as well as Contrast Protect, which you can add to your production instances, where Contrast makes many classes of vulnerabilities unexploitable. So even if your code has vulnerabilities, you can be safe in production with Contrast Protect.
Okay, great. Second question. This probably applies to you, Scott. Maybe, Jeff, you've got some commentary around that as well. The question is, what are some approaches that can be taken to ensure that every instance I launch automatically has the Contrast agent installed?
Sure, I can start here with some kind of, how you would do this on AWS, and then Jeff can probably add some color from the Contrast side. But, this is really where the automation kind of comes into play, that you can, build out as you're deploying your workloads, build in bootstrap scripts that every time an application server is deployed, I can run the appropriate commands to pull the necessary agent and install that agent, or you potentially could even build that agent directly into your machine images that you're trying to deploy, depending on what works best for your particular teams and automation cycles. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to add a little bit more color from what you've seen on the Contrast side as well.
Yeah, sure. And people shouldn't be afraid of adding the agent. It is really pretty easy. It's exactly the same as adding a New Relic or App Dynamics agent to your application. And I want to be clear, Contrast isn't an operating system level agent. It's an application layer agent. So for Java, it's a jar file and so on. So everyone deploys software a little bit differently, but it's usually very easy to find a way to install Contrast into a master image or a master deployment script in a way that it just becomes an automatic part of the platform. And then it's just there, and you don't have to worry about it. So that, remember, there's no running scans, there's no ongoing effort here. Contrast is just part of your platform. It's working in the background and can allow you to focus on actually fixing vulnerabilities instead of spending all your time just chasing them and weeding out false positives and things like that.
Okay, I guess this is a good follow-up question. At what point would the architecture need to be scaled out or resized? How many agents or applications could the default architecture shown in the presentation support?
Yeah, I can take that. So Contrast is a distributed technology. So almost all the security analysis work is done in the agent itself. So the work of Contrast is distributed across all of your application portfolio. The central Contrast team server is really just collecting data about vulnerabilities and libraries and attacks and things like that and bringing it together in a single dashboard. And it can support thousands of agents. We've got many customers that are running with thousands of applications reporting into the Contrast team server. Contrast, the team server architecture itself is scalable. So if you deployed it the way Concur did, then it can auto scale to be as large as it needs to be. But generally, most organizations don't need to do anything fancy there to get started.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And then I've got, I guess this is a two-part question. If I'm using Contrast, do I still need separate SAST, DAST, SCA, and WAFs? And how does this technology change an AppSec program?
What we want to get people focused on is using sort of the right tool for the job. Contrast is actually a combination of SAST, DAST, IAST, and a number of other analysis techniques that don't have names yet. Things like backend connection analysis and configuration file analysis and things like that. But what we think is if you have a tool that does a great job at either finding or protecting you against a certain class of vulnerabilities, then you should rely on that. And maybe the need to run multiple different tools for the same thing starts to lessen. And over time, I think all the AppSec programs I know of are relatively constrained in terms of the scope that they can achieve. So, we want to try to help get great coverage over the kinds of problems that they're concerned about, and then allow them to expand the program so that they can reach all the applications in their portfolio. Maybe instead of just focusing on maybe just the critical apps or just the external facing apps or whatever, maybe we can help them actually get to all of their applications. So I think IAST and Contrast in particular are going to be a big part of people's programs, but there's always going to be a need for other tools. I certainly see folks using static on applications that are written in languages that we don't support yet. Like, we don't have a COBOL agent yet, maybe someday. But, there's always going to be a need. I just think of those as more security research kind of tools than, sort of basic blocking and tackling kinds of tools that can scale.
I definitely agree with you on the API coverage. It's really difficult to get a traditional DAS tool to get any kind of meaningful coverage on an API, and it's really easy with Contrast.
Okay, that was the last question we had. So I'd like to thank the audience for attending this webinar, and I hope that you found it useful. I'd also just like to thank again our speakers today, Rory McKenty at Concur, Scott Ward at AWS, and Jeff Williams at Contrast. And a recorded version of this presentation should be available shortly following the conclusion of this presentation, and we encourage you to share this with your colleagues. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.